Welcome to the Women's Football Show here on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Kerry Pollock, joined with Alison McConnell as always, and our special guest this week is Leanne Crichton. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the meat and bones of it all, let's start with the cup results. Alison, Celtic beat Glasgow City 3-0. Better team of the two, would you say?
Yeah, I thought they were worthy winners. I actually thought at half-time I didn't think there was a huge amount between the teams, and I'll qualify that by saying that I think Celtic could have had a second goal. It was it was chopped off for a foul on Lee Gibson. I thought they could have been 2-0 up by that point, but I thought City had come back into it. But I thought they were very dominant in the second period, and it's quite interesting in the post-match interviews that we were doing, Fran Alonso saying that that's the fifth successive win over Glasgow City, and just referencing the fact that there's been a kind of change in mentality from his team, that previously he'd felt as though they were quite intimidated by City's reputation, obviously the dominant force in the Scottish game, and he'd felt as though that, you know, over the recent seasons that he's seen that evaporate, which I think is quite interesting.
Leanne, can you see Celtic playing with a newfound confidence over the last couple of seasons?
Absolutely, having to agree with Alison and what you're saying. I think that has been the shift in mentality for Celtic. Don't get me wrong, they've recruited really well. They've got a brilliant squad this season again, having lost some really key players last season, but the club, they've been backed, and financially they've been backed. On the pitch you can see that they're certainly reaping the rewards, and with that they've kept the core group of experience that they had as well, players that have been through the tough times, that have faced adversity, that have missed out in the last day of the season, that have lost out in cup finals previously. So you can see that that's all now coming together, and you then get the freshness and the injection of new player quality that's been added. But the mentality thing for me is absolutely massive. When you've been there and done it as a player, quality takes you so far, but you need that mindset to get you over the line. And just the fact that that's 5 games that they've beat Glasgow City now, I think is huge for them, that's totally gone now. They won't even consider that when they face these top sides now, that they completely back themselves. And if you back yourself before the game starts, you've absolutely given yourself a fighting chance when the ball starts turning, and they've shown that they've managed to do that on numerous occasions now.
You were part of a Glasgow City side that was extremely successful. Did you feel that that team were pretty much an unstoppable force?
I think at times you knew you were under a real bit of pressure. There were certain moments that there would have been chats in the dressing room that teams were very, very close, and on occasions Hibs pushed us right until the last encounter between ourselves. It was almost that league decider, and you knew that you were 90 minutes away from failure. But the reality is, what we had in the dressing room was really strong characters that understood what it took, and that we'd been there, seen it, done it, and knew how to then guide the young group of players that were with us on that journey as well. But with that comes expectation, and expectation brings pressure, and it's how you deal with that. So as I say, when you speak about quality and good sides, you look at the league table just now, there's loads of quality sides, but the ones that are at the top are the ones that have got that experience and that real kind of steel and determination at the core.
Definitely, we speak of experience and the quality we've got in the league. It was a 7-0 win for Rangers over Boroughmuir Thistle. Is this the best Rangers side you've seen in a while, would you say?
I think it's hard to gauge actually, because what they've got is a lot of youth within the side, which is brilliant. So good for the Scottish game as well. When you look at the players that are coming through, and Kirsty McLean's that have kind of been going about their business quietly, doing really well. Emma Watson that moved on. You can see these players have come through at almost at that academy level now, and there's a lot of trust being put in them this season. So I've probably looked at them with a real bit of intrigue, because there's been strong Rangers sides over the years and some strong players. When you look at the players that they've lost, in like say a Sam Kerr, irreplaceable to a point, but they're standing up to the challenge, and they seem to be a really well drilled, well organised, and have got a real good bit of confidence about them. I think that comes from the manager as well, and the job that she's doing.
Is that the Joe Potter effect we're seeing, Alison, or was that she's just elevated of what we saw, particularly last season as well?
I think you've seen a change. I think you've seen a shift. Obviously, a new manager coming in, new players coming in. I think there has been a real focus on youth. I think there's still some key players to come back. Jane Ross, obviously, which will offer a significant bit of experience. But I think Rangers have been very quietly impressive to date. I think they're the only team unbeaten so far domestically. I think the change in system that they're playing suits them. I think I think everyone knows the identity and the philosophy that's within the team, and I think Jo's been quietly impressive for me. I think she just goes about her business. She seems very level. You've seen the same reaction all the time. I think at the beginning of the season they were maybe not quite as clinical as what she wanted them to be, which was a real failing last term, a real repeated failing time and again last term, which ultimately probably cost them holding on to their title. But I think you can see that she's corrected that, and I think in the opening weeks of the campaign, I think what she'd done was allowed her players to make mistakes. I think what she said is, this is the way we want to play. If it doesn't come off, that's fine. I still want you to go ahead and stick to it, because eventually it'll bear fruit. And I think that's a sign of a very good coach.
How important is that going to be when we get towards the tail end of the season, Leanne, when the experience we speak about, particularly with the young players and having that level head and being able to go at it?
Well, that's where you rely on the players that have kind of been through these moments. You look at the captain in Nicola Docherty, someone who's got real experience. Players like Rio Hardy that have been brought in, I think, are doing a really good job as well. Jo Potter herself is, I think, very relatable to the players as well, and I think that's helping them just now. She's almost, as much as she's leading the group, she's a player that's been there, seen it, done it, a former England internationalist.
She's still young enough
exactly.
to know how recent her own playing
That's
days
it, so you've got that link, you've got that relationship. So as much as she's giving them managerial advice and coaching advice, she's also able to step in as a player, I would imagine, on the pitch and give them key points. So I think that's massive, and that will be the test. You know, can these young players last in terms of the longevity of the season? As we know, like the increase in fixtures as well, in the last number of years is kind of gone tenfold from where the women's game in Scotland used to be. They're still in every competition just now in terms of the domestic setup. So can you last? Can you keep up those performance levels, and can you keep scoring at the rate that they are?
And it was Partick Thistle 2, Montrose 1 after an 80th minute winner for Brian Graham's side. On to another subject, but still Partick Thistle. They're going up to Aberdeen for a late kick-off for a rescheduled fixture. Leanne, is there something that can be done to suit both sides?
It's difficult in terms of the rearranged fixture, you know, and probably it normally works out that Aberdeen are the ones that travel. You know, I always think as a central based side, you look at it and you think, oh, it's a nightmare, we need to go to Aberdeen. You forget that Aberdeen literally do that every other week, and Montrose are the exact same. So it's a fixture I'm sure that both sides will be desperate to play, though, in terms of the league position and what it looks like and what's to be gained from it. So not ideal in terms of players getting off work and getting there and timing wise and stuff. It's just, as I say, the fixture pile up is the schedule's really busy. When you chuck in the international windows, there's not too many opportunities to play it out with a midweek fixture.
And we had Brian Graham on last week, Alison. He was obviously not very happy, couldn't get players, couldn't get a team together. Should the league step in at any point to try and help teams out in these situations? Yeah,
I thought you raised an interesting point about other alternative dates and when games could be played, and possibly sometimes on a Saturday if we've got if players are available who aren't away in international duty, for example, that the fixture could be fulfilled at a time that maybe suits everyone. I think what you want to do is protect the identity of the league. We're striving towards a professional setup. We know that we're not there. We know that there's some distance still to go. But I think ultimately you want your best teams. You want your most competitive teams and games out in the field, and you want to showcase the league in its most positive light. To that end, you want your best players available. And Brian was saying to us, you know, I'm going back here, I'm chasing up a headmaster to get one of my players off from fifth and sixth period. You know, that's the reality of the league that we're in, that people are juggling other work commitments. So it's very, very difficult. And I do have some sympathy, because I think the differentiation in the calendar now from last season, we have so many more fixtures than what we had, that there aren't a huge amount of free weekends. And I think that is something that we need to be thinking about, maybe in terms of planning. Can we have more slips that would allow for games? Because the reality is that we live in Scotland, the climate conditions aren't always going to be great. Like, there's no question that game couldn't have went ahead. It was a storm weekend. There's no question that it could have been played. It had to be called off. But what we maybe want to see is greater availability of alternative dates. Yeah, definitely. And finally, it was Hibs 7 at Dundee United 0. It's a great result, Leanne, going into a derby, particularly for Hibs.
It is, it's massive, and they've had probably an up and down season, I think, on their performance levels. And you listen to Grant speaking, you know, most weekends, and there's a kind of varying approach to his post-match interviews and what it sounds like. And I'm sure he's striving for that level of consistency. There's no bigger game for them than a derby now. When you look at where that derby game has come in the last number of years as well, it's huge, and there's been so much exposure as well. So you want to be that number one team in Edinburgh, and no doubt the goals will give his side confidence as well heading into that one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it is at Easter Road. It's free entry. Everyone should get themselves along there if they can. Alison, they're tied in points just now. There's nothing more exciting than a derby when there's not much between the two teams. Yeah, and I think Hearts have been quite similar. I think in terms of being up and down and just a bit of inconsistency, you've seen flashes of where Eva Olid wants to take them. That first 20 minutes against Celtic
when they're a couple of goals up, and obviously we know Celtic come back, they were very strong, but you can see again what she's trying to do. I think Hibs have traditionally been top dog in Edinburgh. They've been the more dominant side, pushed Glasgow City.
Absolutely,
Hearts have really just come to the fore in recent seasons. So I think it's quite an intriguing one, and you'd like to see that fixture attract as many people as possible. It held the record attendance up until it was eclipsed twice last term, and I think there's an appetite for it. I think putting it on a Friday night is sensible. I think there's nothing to compete with it.
Everybody loves a Friday night game. I think it changes that dynamic as well, and it opens up so many opportunities for other fans to get there as well.
Absolutely, and I think making it accessible to people is important. I think you're trying to grow the game. I think it's a sensible strategy to go and open the doors to as many people as possible. And you would hope that both sets of supporters, Hibs and Hearts, would see it as a football fix for Friday night.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's a full card on Sunday as well. Montrose take on Motherwell, Glasgow City face Rangers, Dundee United take on Partick Thistle, Aberdeen host Dumbarton, and Hamilton will face Celtic. The standout fixture, Leanne, is of course Glasgow City take on Rangers. Will Rangers be fancying their chances in this one after the result to Celtic?
Well, I think they've got to. You speak about Celtic and that mentality and going up against Glasgow City. I think Rangers are very similar. The fact that they won the title 2 seasons ago, I think that was gone. There was a real belief. City then bounced back. They shared the spoils earlier on in the season. I don't think there was too much between the sides, so it'll be an interesting one to see how it plays out. Rangers, of course, as you mentioned, they're sitting top of the table as well. It's a huge incentive for them, and prior to the last international break, they had that same opportunity to beat Celtic and go top. So that psychologically was massive for them, and I'm sure they'll look at that Celtic Glasgow City result as well and think we can do the same and go and gain more of an edge over Glasgow City especially.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because Glasgow City, obviously, they're 8 points behind Rangers now, albeit that they have a game in hand still to play. But I think it just psychologically, I think they need a result, they need a performance, they need a big result. It almost feels like where it was at the end of last season, where you see City's the spine of that team, you see the experience come out, you see the mentality. I think towards the end of last season, everyone was looking at it and thinking it's Rangers or Celtic's title. City got on with their business very quietly. I think this weekend's game is very similar in terms of what have you got, and this is the time to come out and show it because they've gone out of the Champions League, the draw against Hearts, the slipping further behind in the league, and then going out of the Sky Sports Cup, obviously, on Friday night. I think Leanne needs a big performance at the weekend and needs a result.
Absolutely, and I think the players need that as well. Your Glasgow City, there's expectations there that you go and produce. You could do it last season, albeit they had that 8-point cushion last season that slowly diminished until the last day of the season. We know how it played out, but I don't think Glasgow City want to be any further behind. I think when you speak of that game in hand, if you can reduce that points deficit to 5 at the top of the table, it would be realistic at this stage of the season to know that you can claw that back. I think as that gap starts to increase, one, the points look bigger, but also psychologically and mentally, you probably lose that motivation as well. And I think that'll be the last thing that Leanne wants from the group. She's been there, seen it and done it, and it'll be interesting to see if she can get that tune out of her players this weekend.
If it goes to 11 points, Leanne, and Rangers do win, how much of effect will that have psychologically on City?
It could be huge. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the challenge that you've got in your hands when you're that side that Glasgow City have been for so long, and there's an expectation and a level of dominance that's been produced season on season, but there's been a real change in the squad as well, and you don't have, as much as you've got probably 4 or 5 key players there that know what Glasgow City is about. The challenge for Leanne Ross is that that's changed an awful lot in the last number of years. So how do you get that same buy-in and understanding and consistency levels as well, which I think has been a real challenge, particularly off the back of the last number of international breaks. They've not played out well for Glasgow City on the other side, so and then they've drawn my Hearts and they've gone out the cup, so it's a massive weekend for them, and she'll be hoping that our players can respond and, as I say, reduce that gap. And we want to see it as tight as it was last season. Don't get us wrong, that final day was incredible, so if we could reproduce something like that for the women's game in Scotland, it would be fantastic.
Indeed,
I think City are still quite formidable at Petershill. I think on home soil they still carry something. I think they've still got a bit of menace on their own turf. And I know Celtic went there and won last season, but I still think they're a better team at Petershill.
Yeah, well, let's look at some Scotland duties now. Leanne, you were part of the Scotland team that made their first European Championships, went to the first World Cup. How would you compare your Scotland side to the one that we have currently?
I think the one that we've got currently is probably real excitement about it. We've seen that in the last number of windows. I think it went through that kind of transitional period where you weren't too sure what was coming through and how you were going to replace some of the players that had stepped back from the international scene, albeit you've now got a couple of serious injuries, which I think has really hindered the group when you look at the quality that you've lost. But players are getting opportunities, which I really like. I mentioned Kirsty McLean earlier on. I think she's brilliant. Definitely going to be one for the future. Amy Rogers has come in there as well. Really important game time as well. And across the pitch, I think you've now got a better balance than what there once was. I don't think you've got the same level of experience, and that's the challenge for them just now, especially in the group that they've found themselves in, where it's really tough. There's no opportunities for any kind of poor performances. You're really punished. So that's been a huge obstacle, I think, for them to overcome. But the future looks bright, you know, and looking at even under 19s and stuff, there's a number of players there that are in the kind of periphery, and players that are not making the squad just now that I still think could come back into the fold and do a job. Looking at Emma McCandy, who wasn't included in the last window. There's strength and depth there as well. Christy Murray, another one who's been there for a long time, 80 odd caps, hasn't been included. So I think you've still got an opportunity to dip into that experience. But as I say, the challenge has been the opposition that you've come up against of late that's probably not a true reflection of where the group actually is.
It's very challenging. Alison, when Irene Cuthbert came back into the side, we were there for when Scotland played the Netherlands. She brought a lot of quality to the side. Is there enough firepower amongst the rest of the squad, do you feel, to get back and get something out of the next fixtures?
I think it's a really daunting group. I think you'd have to be honest and say that Scotland aren't at the level of that A1, that League A1. You look at England, you know, European champions, World Cup finalists. Holland, you know, went out of the World Cup at the quarter-final stage only after the extra time to Spain, who went on to win it. They're formidable opponents, and I think Scotland are a level beneath that just now. What you would say is that if you have aspirations and ambitions to get back to playing at major championships and major tournaments, this is the standard that you're going to have to expect. I have to say, I think Scotland will be relegated from the Nations League group. I can't see the necessary results required. And I think it's a shame because they started ever so well. I think that game, at the second half shown at the Stadium of Light against England, promised so much, but I just don't know that we quite have the depth to cope with the loss of players like Caroline Weir, starting the campaign without Erin Cuthbert, Emma Watson out, Sam Kerr out. These are the players that you would pinpoint within Scotland's squad and say they're genuinely at the cream of European level. When you lose them, it's very difficult to compensate. So I think their hands have been tied in some respects, but I think they have just been out of their league a bit.
Yeah, well, Leanne, just before we finish up then, we were reminded that you started your career here at PLZ Soccer. You cover men's and women's football, of course, together. How do you find the treatment of female pundits, not only just in this country but in the UK across?
Generally, if I speak from a personal perspective, I've never had an issue. I don't know if that says more about me or it says more about the industry. I'm not entirely sure. I think we can always do more. Of course we can. I think that's just that when we strive for equality and equity across the board, are we criticised more than men? Probably. Are our views scrutinised more than men? Absolutely. But for me as a pundit, you do your job to the best of your ability, and I think as long as you do that well, then you gain that respect regardless. Do you need to work a bit harder to gain that respect? Most likely, as I've kind of found my whole life, whether it's playing the game or speaking about the game. But no, I'm really fortunate in where I am and where I've kind of come from and the people that I've had the joy of working with as well. For me, football's football. It doesn't really matter, and I try not to overthink it. I think it's brilliant now. There's so much visualisation. So many women on our screens doing what you guys do. You can only try and change that culture and continue to grow it. And I think it's brilliant for any young girl that's sitting watching football and listening to people speak about football, that they can identify with that and they can look at that as hopefully one day a career for themselves. Yeah.
Alison, do you see the mindset perhaps changing as we go through the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think you have to just. I agree with Leanne. I think it's not something that I've ever spent too much time overthinking because you can only control what you can do. But I do think you still have certain kind of attitudes that are prevalent. I think Kevin Keegan's comments a couple of weeks ago just shines a light on the fact that there is still an audience that you might have to convince, which I think can be frustrating in a sense, because you think, no one should have to justify the fact that they're doing their job. If you're doing your job, you're there because you're good at it. That's the bottom line. So I think there is still an element of that. I think it will diminish in commentary on the fact that women are in prominent roles within football. Erodes a bit the more that you see it. I think you have to continue with where we're going. Even a decade ago, you didn't have as many female commentators on television or on radio. So I think we've taken strides forward. I think the importance is simply that you continue doing what you're doing, and obviously I think you've got to do your job well. You have to be good. I do think there's an extra layer of scrutiny if you're a woman, and there's an extra...
I think the difficulty you've got just now is that there's not a lot of women working in the men's game in terms of coaching roles and actually jobs that people see. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around Serena Wiegman and her possible, job prospects moving forward. Emma Hayes, when she stepped back, people are going, where is she going to go and what sort of job? And I think when that changes, and I can see that landscape changing in the next couple of years, I do think there'll be women in high profile roles within the men's game. Because there's men that work in the women's game and there's no issue there. So if there can be that crossover going that way, I don't understand what the issue would be going the other way. And I think once you see that again, it will change the mindset of effectively a nation, because that's what you're trying to do.
I thought she made a really interesting point when she was saying, when I was growing up, I didn't see girls playing football. I didn't have those role models of female footballers on TV or in games. Now that we've crossed that bridge and that there's a whole generation that has easy accessibility to that, the next step is, let me see women in men's football, let me see women in prominent coaching and managing roles, and that's almost the next step to go, and I think it's inevitable that it comes.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Well, that's all from us here on The Women's Show. We'll be back next week with some more action to look forward to. On behalf of myself, Alison, and thanks to Leanne again, that's all from us. Thanks for watching.